Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. Okay, so there's kind of a lot to get through, and I don't have a whole lot of time. I actually just got out of the shower, my hair is air drying, so if it gets gigantic, my apologies. It is what it is. So I've recently started doing this thing on the weekends where I get up early and go for a run while there's nobody outside. Well, actually what I do is I get up early. I get up at the same time I always get up, but I don't know if you remember, usually when I wake up at 5 a.m., I read for an hour, which is basically not the same thing as being awake. Now I actually get out of bed at 5 a.m., and then I drink half a Red Bull, and I go for a run, and then I get back, I drink the other half of the Red Bull, and then I take a shower. And here I am now. Okay, so I already forgot something. You may have noticed I'm a little addicted to caffeine, and in my defense, that's because I get migraines a lot and caffeine is the only thing that helps, and so I have actually quite a high tolerance for caffeine and everything's fine basically. Don't do as I do, just trust me, everything is fine. Some quick things. Thank you to Tumblr user Roses of the South who just started a Atlas 6 group chat on Tumblr, which is so exciting. I am not part of it, not because I don't care that it's going on. I'm obviously extremely curious what everybody's talking about, but because I don't want to interrupt. I want you guys to talk about it as much as you want. I don't want to have to I want you guys to have your own takes on stuff. So I'm not part of it. However, if you do have questions, feel free to ask me. That's available on Tumblr. Apparently it only works on mobile, but all you have to do is, you can find it on my Tumblr or on Roses of the South. And yeah, so that's there for you. Also available to you is the audio recording of Captain MacGyver's Ship of Souls. I did it! It's 2 hours long, so it's basically, a film, but instead of a film, you listen to me read it out loud to you. So it's not a film at all. And then also, I haven't talked very much about this month's spell read, just a lot of things have been distracting me, but this month's read was AMERICANAH, which hopefully a lot of you have either picked up for the first time or have read before. It's an incredible book. It's really eye-opening, just about immigration and migration and about Blackness in the United States and the United Kingdom, which is really fascinating. And at the heart of it is a romance. I have to say that the romance was kind of my least favorite part. I'm not sure I liked the ending. Actually, I don't know why I phrased it that way. I am sure that I did not like the ending. I thought it was going to go a different way, but that's not important. The book is totally life-changing, and it's really hard to put down. I think that because it is literary fiction, you kind of assume it's going to be hard to read, and there are definitely some parts of it that are. There's a lot of touching on difficult things like depression and accepting whether or not depression is real, and sort of the really interesting immigrant experience versus the book we're going to read next month, which is kind of also about Blackness in America. Well, not kind of. It is about Blackness in America, but not from an immigrant point of view. And that book is going to be the same thing, where it's literary in that the themes are sort of elevated. I don't know why I keep tempering my language here. The themes are not sort of elevated, the themes are elevated. It's a really complicated story, just like this one is, with a lot of understanding this experience, a very difficult experience, in a very readable and compelling way. So yeah, but I did want to call out this specific line: the simplest solution to the problem of race in America, romantic love, not friendship. Not the kind of safe, shallow love where the objective is that both people remain comfortable, but real, deep, romantic love, the kind that twists you and wrings you out and makes you breathe through the nostrils of your beloved. Because that real, deep, romantic love is so rare, and because American society is set up to make it even rarer between American black and American white, the problem of race in America will never be solved. I think this is very interesting. There's two separate parts. The argument that love is the only thing that will solve racism, and I feel like she makes a really good point. I do think that romantic love is obviously very different from friendship. There's a reason there's always people who are like, oh, I have a gay friend, I have a black friend. It doesn't change their stance on things. It's because she's right. That sort of love allows both people to remain comfortable and not to necessarily put themselves on the line for the other person. But the kind of love that's like, I would die for you, that is what would change society on a massive, full-scale, just revolutionary way. I think that's the reason that cities are so much more liberal, because you get a lot more interracial couples, and not just interracial, but intercultural. And there's a lot more immigrants in cities, and so you get this diversity of experience, and that, I think, is why the parts of the country that are blue are the parts that are much more diverse. Diversity is just such a good thing all around. But yeah, just something once I read this, I had to put this down and think like, oh my God, that's genius. And also, she's right, it won't work for certain areas of the country that are more homogenous. So it also kind of sheds a light on marriage law fics. I don't know if you guys have read those. Have I read one? I don't think I've actually read one, because initially I was like, ugh, there's consent issues there that I just, not super compelling. But if you think about the idea of forcing people to marry each other in order to eradicate a prejudice problem, it's totalitarian, but it makes sense. Okay, and finally, I don't really know how to say this, so I'm just going to go out and say it. For the last couple of weeks, I have been deciding between two agents, and I have signed with S.P.E.L.L at Triada. So that's very exciting, and I now am able to talk about the querying process in full from beginning to end, so that is going to be our second question for today. The book that we're going to try to sell is a YA rom-com, contemporary romance, very different from the Olivie brand, which means that I will probably be using my real name. So my social media is very likely to transition in the next little bit to my real name. And I don't really want to make this a big like reveal thing. I've never wanted it to be dramatic. I don't really feel like I hide myself very much. It's just a matter of like, I've always said I keep the Olivie things in the Olivie box, and that box is about to get bigger. So yeah. I mean, when I talk about this later, I'm going to talk about it from a very, what I hope is like a clinical and helpful point of view for those of you who are either going through this process or considering going through this process. So right now, I just want to tell you on a personal note, it was a long time coming, and, you know, it felt like such a relief, just a full body relief, because the problem with publishing is it's not a meritocracy like other industries or careers where all you have to do is be good at something. You also have to be lucky. You have to have written the right book at the right time, and it has to have found the right person. And it's just such a blind gamble. I was talking to someone about this, someone I've always gone to for advice about professional career things. And I was talking about how it just feels like I'm finally letting out this breath I've been holding for years, because I'm finally moving forward in my career. And he said, you were always moving forward in your career. You just didn't have any way to measure it. So yeah, so I just have to say, it doesn't mean anything yet. It doesn't mean anything until the book sells. Okay, that's not true. It's hard for me to handle good news because it feels like it's been such a long time, and it's been, it just seems so unlikely. It just seems so unlikely. And it's not like I was giving up. I mean, definitely this is one of those careers, I knew it, where like the people who succeed are the people who never give up. But I think that I had checked out a little bit. I was still working as hard as I could, but my heart was pretty trampled. I went through, a couple years of rejection. And yeah, and we'll talk about that later. But anyway, that's just a heads up that things around here might look different. Yeah. So okay, let's move on. Okay, wow, that was like I think the longest introduction ever. Okay, Miss Olivie Blake, do you have any tips for writing realistic angst and conflict? I find myself drawn to reading stories like those, but I can never come up with anything I could write about myself, or they always turn out too shallow, so I stick to writing about happy endings. How do you reconcile heartbreaking angst with a fulfilling happy ending? Okay, I think I've answered this question before, but it's probably been a while, so I'll talk about it again. But essentially, aiming to write angst is always kind of that's tough. making it your goal to cause other people pain is a good way to make anything shallow. I think what you want to do is focus on the truth. You want to root your story in something that feels real to you. And angst is like, I think I know what you mean, because I feel like there's a lot of, like in fan fiction specifically, the angst tropes involve a lot of trauma or torture. And it's very easy for those things to come off very superficial because they're not real. And this is the thing, is I think people are coming to them because they want the emotional catharsis. They want to feel something, which is fine. But they also want it to be safe enough where it's distant from their experience. They want sort of that, the adrenaline of feeling something, and then also the payout of knowing that it's fiction and everything is fine. And I think that this does end up being quite shallow a lot of times, because that means that a lot of authors are tackling a type of pain that is, that kind of exploits emotion. It makes it this really intense, traumatic situation without really tapping into what's real. And the thing is that everybody knows what pain feels like. Everybody knows what longing feels like, or what loneliness feels like. Everyone knows what it feels like to be disappointed. And what angst stories do is they magnify that feeling, but the stories that do it well are not necessarily trying to magnify it. They're just focusing the scope of their story on something, on the like shade of emotion. How do I want to explain this? Okay, so I said something about the scope of the story. A happy ending, a happy ending is only a happy ending because you've ended it in a happy place. If you zoom out, like look at The Princess's Guide. The Commoner's Guide ends with a totally fantastical happily ever after. But once I started writing again, it becomes the angst of like existence, of trying to exist in society, of growing up, growing older, of accepting new roles, of friendships and relationships changing. And while I know that this doesn't fall under the trope of angst, that is still angst. The kind of wondering how you fit into the rest of the world, that is angst. And wanting things and trying to reconcile the things that you want with the things that you have, or the things that you can't have. So you always want to bring this back to something that is familiar. And again, this isn't a write what you know, this is a know what you write. So even if you don't know exactly what's going on between two characters, or what's going on in your plot, even if it's not something you personally have experienced, you have to root it in something that you do understand. And how you do that is obviously the skill of writing. How you bring that back to shame or guilt, or, that kind of wanting something that you can't have. I think unrequited love is something that people always really want to delve into because of how much it hurts. And I feel like most people know what that feels like. Obviously, there's going to be so many times in life that you want someone that doesn't want you back. And even though you may feel like your story or your little slice of that is very small, you can kind of turn the volume up on what would this feel like if this character... Oh, and I should pause myself to say that for me, the story is only as good as the characters. It's only as real as the characters. So if you have built your characters in a way where their emotions make sense, they seem like real people, and which means that they have strengths and flaws, writing angst for them will come, how would they respond to even the simplest situations? And I think also for me, personally, I don't know what of my stuff that you would consider angst, because there's the very elementary sort of angst, which is, clean, we're in a secret relationship and we can't be together. And then there's angst like the story I just wrote, Comfortable, which is, it's about, two people who are reliant on each other, but they're also not really okay on their own. So they need each other, but they're also not, they're not secure enough on their own to be together because they don't feel like they can give the other what they need. And to them, when they're reacting to them, everything they do and say is very normal. They're just doing what they think is normal or what they think is reasonable. And it's the audience who kind of intuits that what they're doing is painful. They're hurting each other. And that's what causes the audience pain, even if the character is not acknowledging it. Clean is a very simplistic story. It's these two people can't be together because of a very, distant, fantastical reason. And then you get comfortable, which is these two people can't be together because they're a mess. And it's interesting how one pain is safe pain, because it's like, I never have to worry about this because I'll never date a Death Eater. And the other pain is like almost dangerous pain because, oh shit, I've felt this way before, or, this feels like people I really know. And which is not to say one is better or worse than the other. It's just that that's kind of the spectrum of angst. And how you decide to write it is dependent on you. So just make sure that you root it in something that feels true to you. And if it feels true to you, it can't possibly be shallow. But for the record, it's not like happiness is easier to write. It is not. A happy ending is, it's a skill on its own, believing that two characters have accomplished something or they deserve something and they get it. That validation is just as important. It's not like angst is elevated from any other kind of storytelling. It's just about reflecting truth. Everything in writing is just about telling the truth as authentically as possible. And if your truth is happiness, then congratulations, that's excellent. And if you want to find the angst, I'm sure it's there somewhere. I mean, I'm in a happy marriage and I write angst all the time. It's because I have lived a life and I know what it's like to feel things. And, experience is part of it, and I'm getting off track, but anyway, just always bring it back to something that you believe is true. And it will always feel real. Okay, and the querying process. So I'm going to approach this as if you've never heard of querying before. This is how publishing works. This is how books get traditionally published. You write the book, you write a manuscript, it has to be formatted a certain way. People don't always know that. Before you start querying agents, make sure you look up a proper formatting. But yeah, so the first step is you contact agents. Usually what you need is a query letter, which is a page or less, pretty brief, that describes the book and has comps. So books that are similar to it that have sold in the last 5 years or so. This kind of helps the agent understand like what section the book would be in, how it would be sold, how it would be marketed, stuff like that. It also includes kind of like a book jacket explanation of your book and a little bit about you and what you've published before, if anything. I notice that seems to matter less unless you're trying to publish like a memoir or something in nonfiction, or if you are writing a book about, you're a marine biologist and you've written a book about mermaids. That would be something that the agent would want to know. Querying is the sending to agents process. This is the first step, but it's also a huge step. I've heard a lot of stories about people who get an agent on not their first book, on any book beyond their first book. So this was my third manuscript that I queried. The first one that I seriously queried. I sent a query for Masters of Death to someone and kind of was like, no, I don't think this is going to do well because it's urban fantasy, which does not query very well. It had vampires and angels and demons, and at the time, almost every single agent was like, we are overloaded with this, we don't want this. So I sent one and then was like, meh, I'll just publish this myself. So the first one I seriously queried was literary fiction. I think the general consensus that I got from people was that it just wasn't quite literary enough. And I do agree. I think that it got literary in the second half of the book, which obviously you kind of have to convince people in the first 10 pages. The second book was a high fantasy. This is Awe of the Night Approaching. I stopped because I realized that I wasn't getting the kind of feedback I wanted, which I felt was because the word count was too long. I did receive a R&R, which is a revise and resubmit, which is basically an agent who asked for a full manuscript saying, this is good, but I feel that it could be better. I don't necessarily want to commit to the book as it is, so could you work on it and send it back? I decided to pause at that time, and I happened to have written My Mechanical Romance, which is my YA rom-com, and I decided that I felt more confident in that book than in the high fantasy. So I set it aside and started querying My Mechanical Romance. And this was a very different experience from the others. Because essentially what I did before was I would query a few people at a time, kind of wait to hear back, and then once I'd gotten rejected or enough time had passed, I'd send it out again. It was a very slow process. When I would get manuscript requests, I wouldn't hear back for months. I mean, technically, you are supposed to allow agents like up to 4 months with your manuscript just like sitting there. This whole thing is a long process. This is why it's been basically 2 years of querying for me. And then with My Mechanical Romance, it was completely different, which I'm not saying as like, I'm not trying to brag, I'm just trying to explain what happened, which is that as soon as I sent out the queries, I got responses immediately, and then I got manuscript requests within, I want to say 48 hours, and the book was read by the agents within a week, which made me feel like, oh my God, this is it. I've finally written something that people want. It's insane. After the agents had requested a manuscript and then gotten back to me, their emails were almost identical, which is, could we arrange a phone call? So a phone call doesn't necessarily mean an offer. It might mean a revise and resubmit. They just want to talk about the book, or they want to talk about you and what your plans are for the future. Because even though the agent is choosing you based on the book, they are also there for your whole career. They're going to be your agent for hopefully as long as possible. Let's all assume that you'll be successful and then they'll be your agent for the rest of your career. What the agent does is they're basically the gatekeepers in the publishing industry. I mean, I know there are agents who get like 50 to 100 queries a day. So if you think about how many people are writing books, publishers don't accept manuscripts just from anyone. They only accept manuscripts from agents who have like a proven track record of success, essentially, because they want to know someone has looked at this book and someone in the industry has decided this book will sell, so that there's like no time wasting. Which makes sense, but is challenging. I don't want to get into this because I want to really emphasize that I feel like I found someone who gets what I'm writing and who understands the themes of my work and the kind of stories I want to tell. And you guys, I think, are pretty clear on the fact that anything I write is going to involve feminism, and the character is going to find their voice, and it's going to be about female friendships, and hopefully will be an empathetic and compassionate story, which is why I'm excited to write for young women. I'm going to thank Tumblr user Roses of the South once again for saying that she wished she had had my books when she was younger, because it kind of sparked something in me that was like, why am I not writing for young women? Maybe I should. So yeah. So I got called by 2 agents, spoke to both of them. I decided based on who I felt had the stronger revision notes, which, you know, it's hard to choose a person I want to work with based on so little, but I kind of based it on who I felt like really had a good understanding of the book, but who also brought something different to the table. So, you know, it wasn't just someone who had the same exact taste as me. It was someone who was like, well, why did you make this choice? And could you have done this here? That I felt like was going to make the book better. That was how I made my decision. The next step will be a revision process, cleaning the book up, adding some things where anything is lacking, and then going on submitting to publishers to try to actually sell the manuscript, and then the book will probably not come out for like a year or so after that. So it's a very long process. And I have only completed one step of it. Well, I've written the book, and now I've gotten the agent. So I've done the 2 big steps, but there's no guarantee that it will sell. Who knows? It might do well on sub, might not, we'll see. I am hoping that it does because I really do love this story. It is a romantic comedy, which I feel like it just felt right when I was working on it. If you guys watch if you pay attention to my Instagram, I posted a video from the Holy Festival that I went to earlier this year. I was eating falafel fries. I was just there to watch my friend dance, and I did not have any real plans to partake. I didn't have any of the color powder, but somebody gave me, actually a young girl gave me some of hers and was like, come on, and it was just this great, like feeling of togetherness and throwing the color pattern. I was like, this is so atmospheric. Like, how could I not write this? So I did write that into the book, and the characters have a romantic scene there. So that is the mystery of that. I'm sure that this hasn't been all that helpful because it's mixed in with my personal excitement. Sorry. So if you do want to ask me any more questions, I will say that I looked up what to ask the agents when I was talking to them on the phone, because they definitely were like, okay, so what questions do you have? And it definitely felt like a combination of dating, because, you know, it was like, do our personalities work together? But also a job interview. But also I was like, this is so huge. This is so huge for my life and my career that I like am not at all calm, and I'm sweating through my Vans crop top, and like I'm not going to say that I handled the phone call like excellently at all, but definitely I can give you advice if you want any. So yeah, I'm going to force myself to stop talking because I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. Obviously, I'm still very excited about this. I'm still fighting my own optimism about this. But yeah, okay. So thank you guys, you know, for like being here when I was nothing. Let's just go. Let's get started. Let's do our week. Like I said, my social media may be changing. If you follow me already, you'll still be following me. But yeah, I don't know what I'm doing yet. All of this happened so fast. It happened so fast that I didn't want to talk to anyone. I just didn't want to talk to anyone because I was so scared it would just slip through my fingers or that it wasn't real. I'm having really intense imposter syndrome right now. Like, I just don't believe that this could possibly be happening to me. I mean, if you had asked me a month ago if I felt like I deserved it, I'd be like, yes, of course, I worked so hard. And now it's happening and I'm like, how can this be happening? So anyway, we're flawed beings. Okay, but this has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing. And I'll see you next week.